What's up guys, Generation Alchemist here, and today we have a sort of different video. It's a discussion slash news video, and the topic we'll be discussing, which you should already know as it's in the title of the video, is the new rule changes to Yu-Gi-Oh! And the details of Pendulum summoning. And before we get started, I'd like to say, if you guys have any feedback or comments on this new video type, feel free to leave a comment down below. This is the first time I've tried something like this, and I'm still just testing the waters, so any feedback would be very much appreciated. But yeah, anyway, let's get started with the rule changes first. The three new rules that Konami released this morning are: the player who goes first will not draw for the first turn. Both players can have a field spell on the field at the same time, and effect card text will be written in a new style, making them easier to understand. The first rule change, the player who goes first will not draw for the first turn, is one that I think is very good and will definitely improve the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! This rule, which is used in many other trading card games like Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, and Hearthstone, is meant to help balance the game, basically, and make going second less of a disadvantage. Because for the longest time in Yu-Gi-Oh!, going first was almost always like a better option, and was much more advantageous, as there were like almost no downsides aside from maybe the fact that you can attack, which is less of a downside and more of a logical thing, as if you could attack, it'd just be stupidly ridiculous. But anyway, if you went first, you could set up a bunch of things that could hinder your opponent's stun cards like MSTs and Dark Bribes and Compulsories and Torrentials, stuff your opponent would have to waste their entire turn and hand trying to get rid of, or having to play around, usually leaving you with a significant hand and field advantage. It would be incredibly difficult to set up anything going second, while on the contrary, if you went first, you would not only get to stun your opponent, but also set up with no backfield to block your monsters from going in. Even decks that were relatively neutral, in terms of going second or first, always chose first, because the setup you're able to get was just too good. With the new rule change, hopefully things will be a tiny bit more balanced and we won't see people going first all the time. Going first is still probably going to be a better option, but it's only if you have the right hand. If you don't have that good of a hand, you might want to go second to get that extra card. Going +1 might not seem like much, but in Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially on the more competitive levels, getting every advantage is crucial, and single cards can swing entire games. I think this rule is a good one, and hopefully it'll make Yu-Gi-Oh! More balanced and fun to play. The next rule, both players can have a field spell card on the field at the same time, is one I'm more, on the fence about. It's exploitable, to say the least. I don't know how to say it, but I don't know. It just seems like it would make things unnecessarily, chaotic and confusing. I can imagine having, multiple continuous effects on the field, buffering both sides, will definitely create, loopholes and exploits and, general mayhem, and just make the game harder to play. I'm sure they'll have to, reword some cards and make some new rules on top of this one as well, because even though I can't think of one off the top of my head, there's bound to be a way to create some kind of game breaker, as Yu-Gi-Oh! Is and always will be an exploitable game, and whose players will exploit the hell out of it. This rule will also make it harder to get rid of field spells, as before an easy way to remove them would be to play your own. That's really a benefit and a downside. It really depends on which side of the field you're on, but it'll definitely give significant advantage to cards like Rainbow Ruins, which already protects itself and which used to be easiest to remove by just placing your own. All in all, it will be fun to play with two field spells and will definitely result in some interesting scenarios. At the moment, it just seems like it would be way too chaotic to be worth it. While I have to wait and see this in action before I can really make a final verdict, right now I think that this may not be the best choice by Konami, just making the game, overall harder to play. And of course, the final rule change isn't really a rule change per se, but more of a functionality and aesthetic change. Konamini, what is a Konamini? I'm gonna just call it Konamini from now on. Excuse the tangents. Konamini has made card effects easier to read and understand, and I even think we have an example how this is gonna work in some of the new effect monsters they've announced. White Tiger Summoner, for example, has an effect that reads 1. While this card is a normal summoned, you can activate this effect. Special summon 1 level 4 or lower monster from your hand. 2. While this card is in your monster card zone, your monsters gain 100 attack and defense. The addition of numbers, which are circled, is, I think, what Konami is trying to implement, and I assume it'll be used to sort out, the timing of cards with multiple effects. Timing is probably one of the most complicated things in Yu-Gi-Oh! And with the new text, it'll hopefully make things a little easier to understand. And really, anything that makes Yu-Gi-Oh! Simpler and more accessible is a welcome change. Unfortunately, though, Pendulum summoning seems to directly counter this, being one of the most complicated things they've introduced to Yu-Gi-Oh! Thus far, or at least that's how it seems from the information they've given us. The details are just too vague and confusing to make a proper conclusion to how everything works, but before we talk about that, let's first take a look at what they released. And it says, Konami says, how to Pendulum Summon. 1. A new Pendulum Zone has been created on the field on the left and right of the monster and spell trap zones. 2. You can place Pendulum monsters there, and they are treated as spell cards when they are placed there and have spell effects. Pendulum monsters have a scale number on the left and right of the card text. When Pendulum monsters are sent from the field to the grave, they go to the extra deck face up, which is really weird. When you place the Pendulum monsters on the field with different scales, you can special summon from your hand or from your extra deck Pendulum monsters with the scale numbers in between. Wow. Okay. It's confusing to say the least. Let's try to break it down. First off, we have a new Pendulum Zone, which, as you can see, there are 2 of, 1 on each side of the field. You can place Pendulum monsters here, and when they're here, they can activate their effects. This brings up the question, where are the Pendulum monsters? Are they in the extra deck or the normal deck? No concise answer is given. It does say they go to the extra deck face up, but can also be played from the hand. And when we take a look at the actual Pendulum monsters, as you can see here, you can see that there's some weird combination of spell and monster. Not only is their card color half monster brown and half spell blue-greenish, they have both a spell and monster effect. For example, the Chronomancy Magician has an effect of spell effect. If you control no monsters, you can activate this card. If your Pendulum monster battles an opponent, your opponent cannot activate trap cards until the end of the damage step. If you have a Maijutsushi card or an Odd Eyes card in your Pendulum Zone, this card Pendulum Scale becomes 4. And it also has a monster effect, which reads, Monster effect, while this card is in your monster card zone, once per turn, cards in your Pendulum Zone cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. The spell effect comes into play when it's in the Pendulum Zone, and the monster effect comes into play when it's in the monster zone. But how exactly does this all work? Can you just, place them in the Pendulum Zone whenever, like spells, or can you just summon them onto the field like monsters? And what about the levels? Do they have restrictions based on their levels? Are they even played like that? Or do they come from the extra deck? I have no answers given. It's really quite confusing to wrap your head around this. And that's just questions on how the monsters work, and not even the details about the summoning. The scale numbers, summoning in between, we don't have nearly enough info to make sense of all this. My best guess is that Pendulum monsters will be in the normal deck. They can be played whenever into the Pendulum Zone like spells, but they can also be normal summoned like monsters. The scale numbers will be, I don't know, that if you, for example, have a monster with a scale number of 8 on one side and a 1 on the other side, you can summon any Pendulum monster with a number in between into the monster zone from the hand or extra deck, or at least that's how I think it is. But of course, this is all speculation on my side, and it won't mean anything until Konami either denies or confirms this. Pendulum summoning seems interesting and powerful, but at the moment we just don't have enough information to really make a final judgment, and it also seems like pendulum summoning requires a lot of resources, which begs the question, will it change anything, especially on a competitive level? Exceeds and, Synchros to a lesser extent impacted the gameplay of the game pretty heavily due to the fact that they really don't require too much, and for the most part were generic and accessible to most decks. If pendulum summoning is very resource intensive, it might be something like rituals or fusions, where it really isn't useful to play unless you have a deck specifically geared toward it. But once again, this is all speculation. Hopefully Konami will release some more information clearing things up, or at the very least giving a clear demonstration in the anime, Arc 5, which always helps sort things out. But yeah, that's basically all they've released thus far, and of course, if they give any more information, I'll be sure to try and make a video of it. If you want more information, I suggest checking out Cybernight's website, which I use as a source, and his video, both of which I'll link in the description down below. And of course, if you have your own ideas, speculation, or opinions, feel free to share it in the comments below. I'd love to hear your guys' perspective on things, and hopefully we can make more sense of this. Pendulum summoning seems like a cool and unique concept that will hopefully be useful and not too resource intensive, and hopefully be, not as confusing as they make it out to be. But anyway, that's all I have to say. Remember to leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more. Feel free to leave your feedback on the new video type and pendulum summoning mechanics, and yeah, other than that, not much else to say, and I guess I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.